Hey everybody, welcome back to Simply Holy Living, that place where average humans are learning to be holy. And we are currently learning how to keep the Sabbath holy because this was a practice of Jesus, and we're trying to put into practice those things that he did because we're trying to follow our rabbi and become like him. So we've been talking about how to keep the Sabbath and, keep it holy. And lately we've been talking about identifying those fears that keep us from entering into the Sabbath altogether. And then last time we talked about how to visualize the Sabbath. Like what is it supposed to look like? The words that came up were, it's supposed to be a delight and a joy, and it becomes that. It's a feast for us. We get to feast on this beautiful day like our ancestors did. And one of the things that we talked about was this phrase, Shabbat Shalom. May you enter into the peace of the Sabbath. But it's even more than that. Peace like Zen brings to mind. It's not a Zenful state. It is really experiencing the completeness of God, the wholeness of creation, because he worked for 6 days and on the seventh day, everything was done. He completed it. And so we get to enter into the completion on that day, just that one day, every 7 days, we get to experience what life was supposed to be like before the fall, and how God says it will be one day again, I suppose, in the new heavens and the new earth, So it's sort of this time where we get to enter into that beautiful intended creation, God's original intent for one day. And so we get to experience this. And so we brought up all these images, and I tried to stimulate your imagination. Like, what could it be? Well, it's going to museums and gazing on the beauty of the beautiful paintings that people have created throughout history, or it's going to the beach and immersing yourself in the glory of the ocean and God, or going to a park and experiencing that beautiful scent of the trees and the grass and the flowers and just everything that you're surrounded by. So it's some way getting you to immerse yourself in the beauty of God. And, so now we're going to move into this arena of how do you enter into that, and what does it look like? And I will just start by saying that this has been the hardest video to create, the hardest podcast, because I find myself so many times trying to explain something that actually is going to be different for every single person, because we're all in these different places in life. You may be single. You either live on your own in your own apartment, or you live in a singles household. You may be young married and you don't have kids yet, and you're just enjoying your partnership. You may have toddlers right now, which is already just a hard state to be in all the time, or you may have teens, which feels very much the same, or you may be an empty nester. All your kids are adult, they've moved out, or somewhere in there. You're somewhere in there. So your life is going to continually change. What the Sabbath looks like specifically is going to keep changing as you grow and your circumstances change. Your Sabbath keeping is going to change. So I can't give you formulas, how-tos, blah blah blah. But I can try to give you principles that will guide you as the Holy Spirit leads you into whatever it's going to look like for you. So in hopes of doing that, because we're going to start entering into now some how-tos. How do you do this? So I want to bring to mind the story that comes up over and over when God is talking about the Sabbath, when he's reminding people, when he's teaching people. There's a certain story that comes up because this is his model for us. And that is the story of the Israelites being led out of their slavery. They were, slaves in Egypt for 400 years. God, through Moses, leads them out, and he leads them through the waters of the Red Sea and into the promised land. That was the process that he was trying to take them through. It's exactly our process. We were slaves in our sin. God, through Jesus, leads us through the waters of baptism, and he wants us to enter into the promised land, right? So this is supposed to be I don't know what they call it. I don't know if the right word is an allegory, because it's not really, because it really happened. The story really happened. But it is a model. It's a tangible example of a spiritual concept. So I want to talk about this story just for a few minutes to prepare our hearts for and get our minds going on how we should be thinking about entering in. The story with the Israelites is that after they went through this miraculous experience, then God was ready to lead them into the promised land. He says, go up and take hold of it, go in. And they're like, well, let's send some spies in. They had this good idea. Let's send spies in, and God's like, okay, you can send some spies in. That's fine. And so they did. But what ends up happening is those spies come back and 10 of them are just afraid. They are freaking out. They're like, no, it is good in there. I mean, the fruit is amazing. The places it's amazing. Yes, it is a promised land full of milk and honey. But we could never do this, you guys. I mean, they're huge. The people are huge. We're like grasshoppers to them, And they start just recounting all the bad things, all the things that everybody should be afraid of. And they get the people whipped into a frenzy of fear. There's only 2 guys that go, oh, it's the promised land. Oh, and yeah, that's true. What they're saying is true. All those things are there. But no, God will surely do it. He told us to go up. He's going to protect us. He's going to take care of us. Let's trust God. Trust God. Come on, guys. You can do it. These 2 guys. But the 10 went out. They've won over the crowd. The crowd is too afraid. And so I want to pick up the story here. The first time it's told is in Deuteronomy. Well, it's not. This is the recounting that Moses is giving in Deuteronomy 1. And he just talked about bringing the spies bringing back the report. And in verse 26 of chapter 1, it says, but you were unwilling to go up. You rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. You grumbled in your tents and said, the Lord hates us. So he brought us out into Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Like this was God's plan all along. Think about what they're saying. They're like, God hates us. And we know we get this way. Come on, people. This is when our, all of our self-pity and our fears take over and we're like, God is against me. He hates me, And I have felt this many times. I'm not trying to make fun of us. It's just like, it's ludicrous to think that they thought this was God's plan. Like, hey, I'm going to take him out of slavery and then I'm going to kill him. It is ridiculous when you really break it down and you see how Satan has gotten in there and filled their hearts with fear, which he does to us all the time. But he's, they're doing this. They're grumbling in their tents and they're saying the Lord hates us. So he brought us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Where can we go? Our brothers have made our hearts melt in fear. They say the people are stronger and taller than we are. The cities are large with walls up to the sky. We even saw the Anakites there. And so they're just talking about all these fears. And this is exactly what happens to us when we think about entering into the Sabbath. We come up with all of the reasons why it won't work. Then this is what's going to happen. It's not going to take 10 spies coming back to tell us, to whip us into a frenzy. No. We'll do it to ourselves. This doesn't work and this doesn't work. We try it and then we fail. Oh, well, that didn't work like I thought. And so then we get discouraged and then we quit. Right? This is what happens to us because our fears get the best of us. So let's listen to these next words from God. It says, then I said to you, do not be terrified. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt before your very eyes. And in the wilderness, there you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a father carries his son all the way you went until you reached this place. In spite of this, you did not trust the Lord your God, who went ahead of you on your journey in fire by night and a cloud by day to search out places for you to camp and to show you the very way you should go. So God is coming in and he's like reminding them, no, remember, I protected you all this time. I gave you the cloud. You weren't hot. And I gave you the fire at night so you weren't cold. And I rained down manna from above. And I give you water from a rock. I took care of you, remember? And he's saying this to you, disciple. I took care of you, remember? Remember when you were living in all that sin and you were a slave to sin? I brought you out. I introduced you to the exact right person at the exact right time in your life where you were open to hearing my voice now. And remember how you became a Christian? You got baptized and I worked all this stuff out for you. Like I gave you a job. I gave you a place to eat. I gave you a place to live. I gave you food to eat. I gave you maybe a spouse. I've given you hundreds of brothers and sisters. I've put you in a family. I mean, think about all that God has done. He has gone before you. He has taken care of you up to this point. He's trying to remind them, right? Well, then he says in verse 34, but when the Lord heard what you said, he was angry and solemnly swore, no one from this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to give you. I swore to give your ancestors, except for Caleb. And then he talks about, the guys that were like, they listened, they believed. But as for the rest of you, you're not even going to get to enter into the promised land, okay? Because you wouldn't let me work you through your fears. All right. Now, I want you to fast forward. I think it's like 1,000 years. I'm not sure exactly the timing, but here we have them entering into the promised land, or, entering into their wilderness there. And then if you fast forward to the time of the kings, about 1,000 years later, then David is actually reminding them of this story. And in chapter 95 of the Psalm 95, he's reminding them of this story. And he says in verse 8, he says, hey, do not harden your hearts as you did in Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years, I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. He's talking about that generation who would not get to enter in the promised land, because the promised land represents that Sabbath rest, the rest of God. So he's reminding them of that. And he's saying, wait, don't do that. Don't harden your hearts like they did. Don't do that. He's trying to get them not to fear. Trust God, right? Then you fast forward another 1,000 years, because after that, Jesus was born 1,000 years later, right? Approximately. And now the Hebrew writer is writing about that, and he's reminding them in Hebrews 3 and 4. He's talking about this time again, and he's reminding them of, all this whole story, and about how they had, they hardened their hearts, and how they had not trusted, and how they had gone astray, and how God declared they shall never enter into my rest. He brings it up 3 times. He actually quotes that verse 3 times. And at the very end of that, I wish I could read it all, but I'm not going to. You can in your own time. But Hebrews 4 in verse 8, I believe it is, he says, for if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day, saying, this isn't just about the promised land that was promised to Joshua and those people. This is something bigger. It represents something bigger. It represents entering into the rest of God. He says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience. Okay, so let's hold up, stop. It appears that what it's saying is that we could miss this. We could miss out, just like that generation missed out. The 4th generation, I feel so sorry for them. They saw these great works of God. God rescued them, but then they didn't even get the sweetness. They didn't even get the promised land because they missed it, because they were too caught up in their fears. And so he's saying, don't do that. Don't let that happen. Don't let that happen to you. Make every effort to enter into that rest. So this is counterintuitive for us. It says make every effort to rest. I mean, that doesn't seem to go together. We think of rest, everything should be easy. That's when that my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It should feel easy all the time. And somehow we start to think that if, where the Spirit leads, then everything will fall into place and it'll be easy, and, sometimes that does happen, when everything just falls into place and you're like, wow, God just made all that happen. I can't even imagine. It's clearly the Spirit was leading me there. Yes, but then sometimes the Spirit leads us and it's hard. actually. You think about Paul and his journey. Like one time the Spirit said, no, do not go in. You can't go into Asia. Actually kept him from going into Asia, which Paul thought that's where he's supposed to be going, but Spirit said no. And Spirit led him into different places. And when he led him into those different places, what did he face? Flogging and shipwrecks and getting beaten with rods several times, and eventually being beheaded. I mean, he entered into actually a lot of struggles, a lot of hardships, a lot of pain, all of that. But the Spirit was leading him then also, right? He was following the Spirit. So when we follow the Spirit into the Sabbath, we have to understand that it's going to take effort on our part. God is not against effort. God is saying we are going to have to make every effort. And remember how I told you the Sabbath will permeate your whole week. The 3 days after the Sabbath, you'll be basking in the memories of it. And the 3 days before, you'll be anticipating it, and you'll be preparing for it. And we remember that the Bible talks about that preparation day that comes before the Sabbath. You're going to have to do some preparation. And so this is where it can get very complicated. And I've been trying to make this video. It's been hard because I allow myself to make it complicated. But this preparation is going to be different for every single person, and you have to understand and you have to be okay with the fact that making every effort is going to entail trying and failing. You're going to try things that don't work, and then you're going to try some other things and they do, and then it stops working after a while, and you're going to be tempted to quit because we're human and that's what we do. But it's okay to make some effort to make this happen. So that's where we're going to start today. Is we're going to start with, well, what's the effort that I would have to make, and how do I prepare for this at all? Given that you're decided, I'm going to do this, I trust, I'm going to do it, I'm going to overcome my fear, I'm going to make sure this happens. So the way that we're going to start is we're going to start by establishing your day, your time. Now, and then we're going to work our way backwards. I call this backwards planning. I'm sure that there's some technical term that, event planners use that sounds way better, but I just call it backwards planning. And it's where you go, okay, this is the downbeat. Okay, the downbeat, that's a musical term. We say, when's the downbeat? Okay, well, if that means when is the conductor going to go down? Like this is the first note, right? Okay, so that downbeat is at 7 p.m. Okay, so that means I got to work my way backwards. I got to, that means that I've got to be on stage, with my, in black and what I'm supposed to be wearing, in the correct dress, and my bow has been rosined, and my instrument is pretty much in tune, and I'm warmed up. My fingers are ready to go. I'm ready to perform. I'm just sitting there waiting for that conductor to get to walk out on stage. I'm doing that at 10 till, so I'm out there just doing my last minute practicing and waiting. And so then if I back that up, that means I need to be arriving at the building about 15 minutes before that, because I got to make sure that I can park and get to the right place backstage where I get to, leave my instrument, make sure that I've got everything out of the case and I've got the right music and all that. Okay, so that means I need to get there 15 to 20 minutes before that. Okay, so that means that I need to be getting into my car and leaving at this exact time to get there. Okay, so then before that, I need to be getting into the shower and getting all of that. Do you see you know what I'm talking about, right? So if you're having to plan an event, no matter how big it is or how small it is, you're going to have to back it up. You work your way backwards. This is how event planners do it for weddings. This is how we do it when we're trying to get our whole entire family to be at the airport at the right time. We have to back it up, make sure our plan is working, or because we can't just make it happen. All right, so this is going to be your life. How do I back it up? Well, the first thing is you have to decide your place and your time, and that's all we're going to talk about today, is what is the exact date and time. I said place, I meant date and time. And I'm just going to give a case for the traditional Sabbath. That's what this is. It's a case for the traditional Sabbath. You say, what's the traditional Sabbath? Well, that is sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And they say sundown because that is when the Jewish day begins, is at sundown, because in the beginning, when God created each day, at the end of each, when he created something, he says, and then it was evening, and then it was morning the first day. So they count their days starting in the evening. That is, don't even try to wrap your brain. If that's the first time you've heard that, don't try to wrap your brain around it right now. Because I heard that a long time ago, and I have been trying to wrap my brain around that for probably a decade. But the traditional Sabbath goes from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. Now, lots of people don't celebrate it that way. So that's the Jewish traditional Sabbath. Somehow, after Constantine, things got changed to where, because that was when everybody traditionally celebrated the Sabbath. That's when Paul did it, Peter, Jesus, everybody in the first basically 300 years of Christianity, they kept that Sabbath. But Constantine wanted us to get away from that because he wanted to separate Christians from their Jewish heritage. And he had his reasons for that. I don't agree, but whatever. So after that, it changed to Sunday. Well, we're going to celebrate the resurrection. It makes sense. It goes with it, and I don't have a problem with that. So then it started being that day is the Sabbath day, the day of rest for Christians. We're different. All right. And I understand that. And then you fast forward several hundred years, maybe thousands of years, and you get to what we have today is our Sundays, which the way that we worship is very different than the way that they worshiped way back then, when it was much simpler, where the family went to worship together and they read from the scrolls, they read from the Bible, they sang some songs, and then they had a meal together. That's what it was. That's what they did on that day. But today we don't do things that way. So we have, we meet in a building. Well, that requires that we have to have people help setting up, and we have to have people doing the sound system to make sure that you can be heard in this day and age. That means that if you have musicians, they need to come early and they need to practice and they need to get the songs together. And then what about children? Well, do we want to have them in the service? Well, no, it'd be better if they had their own thing so they could have fun. Okay, well, and because sometimes it can feel boring to sit in here. So now we have children's ministry. Well, then we got to get people to work the children's ministry. And then, okay, well, what about ushers? We have to have people, because now we have this communion. It's not a meal anymore. It's just this little juice and, cracker. And we got to have people to pass that out. And then we got to have people to greet people and wait, so they know where they should park. And we got to make sure that, okay, so you understand, there's a lot that goes into a Sunday. And sometimes it doesn't feel like you're entering into that rest of God, right? Because there's a lot to make happen on a Sunday. And so, I think some people celebrate it on that Sunday. Some people, even if you're in the ministry, you do it on a Monday. And I've heard of all that. And I would say that any of those are probably acceptable. But when I'm speaking about it from this point on, I am going to be referring to a Friday night to Saturday night Sabbath. That's what I'm going to be referring to. And this is what I decided to celebrate. And I do not think it's the only way. Hear me on this. But these are my reasons sort of for picking that, was that I felt like, well, it is what the Jewish people have been doing for thousands of years. So there must be something to it. Let me just try it. At first I just said, let me just try it because of that. And then another thing was it sort of matched up with our family's rhythm, because our kids were doing school. And even when we were homeschooling, we basically were going Monday to Friday. Even if we only did 4 days, we might do Monday through Thursday or Tuesday through Friday, but it sort of worked out that way. We were kind of wrapping things up on Friday. And so it just kind of made sense that we would follow that rhythm. And then the other thing was, it sort of, because we wanted to include our kids in this rhythm. We wanted them to feel it. Like you get you get to the end of your week, your work week, and then you just press pause. You just go, we're going to stop it. We're going to celebrate Sabbath. We wanted our children to feel that too. And then also it matches the world around us. Most of the world is resting on when they enter into their Saturday. And so we wanted to match the culture in which we lived. So those are the reasons that we did it. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that should not work for us, okay? The Sabbath never works perfectly. If you're listening to the podcast, I'm putting my quotation mark fingers, because nothing ever works 100% of the time. And that's part of the beauty of the Sabbath, is that it's not going to be perfect, and you're going to press pause anyway. It's a step of faith. It's belief. It's this belief that they were talking about. It's entering in, even though it is scary, and you go like, I don't know how this is supposed to work, but trusting, oh my gosh, God just worked that out. You get to experience how God works things out that when it shouldn't really work. And that's definitely doubly true for us because we are, full-time in the ministry, and on Sundays we have a lot of responsibilities. We're, usually overseeing the music, we're usually overseeing the children, and sometimes preaching the sermon even. So we had to figure out how to make sure that every single thing would be done for that Sunday service as much as possible by 5 o'clock on Friday. Okay, because that was our day and time. We said by Friday at 5 o'clock, I want to have everything done. Oh my goodness. Okay, so how would I make sure that everything from the week is done, plus that Sunday service is planned, and I don't have to sit around and think about it. It's not hanging over my head. People have been called. They're not called last minute, whatever, that everything for that service is done by 5 o'clock on Friday. So, there's a few things working against this, but can I just tell you that it has been all the more miraculous that God has actually made it happen, because it's taken faith on our part, and it will take faith on your part to make this happen, believing that God is going to give back, that when you give God 5 minutes, he gives you back an hour, that you give God $5 and somehow you end up with 50. I mean, this is the way God works, right? You can't outgive God. He will always make a way. When you say, God, I'm going to give you this time, then we trust that he will give us the time that we need to do the other things later that we need to do, like either before or later. He will work it out. So having your cutoff time is very important. You can't just say, oh, well, when I wrap things up on Friday, then I will. No. That will never, I'm just saying, word from the not so wise, but word from the other side. It actually doesn't happen that way because things get backed up and backed up and backed up. You have to have a cutoff time. You have to decide what it is. It does not have to be 5 o'clock. The Jewish people go by sundown. They literally go by sundown. I've never figured out how to do that, so I just went, I'm going to start by just going 5 o'clock on Friday. So I have this cutoff time, 5 o'clock on Friday. It has to be done. If it hasn't gotten done by then, it's not going to get done. I'm going to be pressing pause, and I'll pick it up at 5 o'clock on Saturday. So I will say this. It never goes later than that, but sometimes I start earlier than that. That's the only caveat I would give. Sometimes I go 3 o'clock on Friday to 3 o'clock on Saturday. And that's because maybe sometimes I have something that I need to plan for 3 o'clock on Saturday. So I will back up my 24 hours to start at 3 o'clock on Friday. So, but I never go later. And that's definitely something that you should consider, is never, ever going later than that time. So that way you can start your backwards planning. The plane leaves at 5 o'clock. The downbeat is at 5 o'clock. The curtain goes up at 5 o'clock. Whatever analogy you need to use, the game starts at 5 o'clock. I don't know what you need to use, but just know that you're working backwards from there, okay? So I want you to pray about this. This sounds like something small, like, oh, I already decided what it's going to be. I want you to go back and I want you to recheck it with God. I want you to just recheck it with God. I've given you a case for my timing, and I want you to go to God and say, will you give me the faith to make this my time? Will you help me? Will you help me to overcome my fears? Because what's going to happen now is Satan is going to come back with all the reasons why that doesn't work. I'm in the ministry, or I have this to do on Saturdays, or I have that, and whatever. It's going to come up. I just want you to give God every single opportunity to do that thing that he did to the Israelites, to say, no, remember when I did this? Or remember, see, I could work it out for you. And if there's any possible way for you to enter into that traditional Sabbath, I want you to let God convince you. And just trust. And even if you have to go into it like going, okay, I'll give this a try, Tracy. I don't think it's really going to work, but okay, I'll try it for 1 month. Even if you just tried it for a certain period of time, for 6 weeks, I'll give it a try, okay? But give God the chance to convince you, because you may be convinced there's no way that would work for me. It has to be Saturday. It has to be Sunday. Or it's no way that would work for me. It has to be Monday. Will you give God just one more chance? Will you just promise me that you'll talk to God about it and see if maybe this would work for you? So I'm going to just stop right there. And I'm going to ask you to pray that prayer. And you may come out of that prayer and say, no, God said sundown on Saturday to sundown on Sunday. Okay, amen. That's great. I don't mind. Or God just said, it's from when you wake up on Saturday to when you wake up on Sunday, from Saturday morning to Sunday morning, or from Sunday morning to Monday morning, or whatever it is. It's okay. I'll give you that. Even though from now on in the conversation, I will be talking about the Sabbath as if it starts at sundown on Friday. You can come up with a different time. It's okay. I just want to make sure that you've actually given God the chance to talk to you about it. So this is sort of your assignment from this video, is go and spend some time with God, really allowing him to speak in, just a time of meditation. Would it at all be possible for you to try sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday? And that's all I'm going to give you for this time. Okay, so I hope that you will put this to the test. I really pray that you will go to God and let him speak into this area of your life. Until next time.